You've mentioned that FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, is one of the great leaders in American history. Why is that?
Franklin Roosevelt had the power of empathy. No leader that I have ever studied or been around or spent any time reading about was able to connect with people who were so different from himself as Franklin Roosevelt. He came from the most elite family. He never had to work for a paycheck in his life. When he was president, he was still collecting an allowance from his mom. I mean, you couldn't be more elite than Franklin Roosevelt, but he authentically connected. This was not, propaganda. He was able to feel the pain and understand the lives of some of the most destitute Americans in other parts of the country.
It's interesting. So through one of the hardest economic periods of American history, he was able to feel the pain.
He was able to. The number of immigrants I read oral histories from, or who have written themselves. Saul Bellow is one example, the great novelist, who talk about how, as immigrants to the U.S., Saul Bellow was a Russian Jewish immigrant. He said, growing up in Chicago, politicians were all trying to steal from us. I didn't think any of them cared until I heard FDR, and I knew he spoke to me. And I think part of it was FDR really tried to understand people. That's the first thing. He was humble enough to try to do that. But second, he had a talent for that. And it's hard to know exactly what it was. But he had a talent for imagining himself in someone else's shoes.
What stands out to you as important? I mean, he went through the Great Depression, the New Deal, which some people criticize, some people see. I mean, it's funny to look at some of these policies and their long ripple effects, but at the time, it's some of the most innovative policies in the history of America. You could say they're ultimately not good for America, but they're nevertheless hold within them very rich and important lessons. But the New Deal, obviously, World War II. That entire process. Is there something that stands out to you as a particularly great moment that made FDR?
Yes, I think what FDR does from his first 100 days in office forward, and this begins with his fireside chats, is he helps Americans to see that they're all in it together. And that's by creating hope and creating a sense of common suffering and common mission. It's not offering simple solutions. One of the lessons from FDR is, if you want to bring people together, don't offer a simple solution. Because as soon as I offer a simple solution, I have people for it and against it. Don't do that. Explain the problem, frame the problem, and then give people a mission. So Roosevelt's first radio address in March of 1933, the banking system is collapsing. And we can't imagine it, right? Banks were closing, and you couldn't get your money out. Your life savings would be lost, right? We can't imagine that happening in our world today. He comes on the radio. He takes 5 minutes to explain how banking works. Most people didn't understand how banking worked, right? They don't actually hold your money in a vault. They lend it out to someone else. And then he explains why, if you go and take your money out of the bank and put it in your mattress, you're making it worse for yourself. He explains this. And then he says, I don't have a solution, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send in government officers to examine the banks and show you the books on the banks. And I want you to help me by going and putting your money back in the banks. We're all going to do this together. No simple solution, no ideological statement, but a sense of common mission. Let's go out and do this together. When you read, as I have, so many of these oral histories and memoirs for people who lived through that period, many of them disagreed with some of his policies. Many of them thought he was too close to Jews, and they didn't like the fact he had a woman in his cabinet and all that. But they felt he cared, and they felt they were part of some common mission. And when they talk about their experience fighting in World War II, whether in Europe or Asia, it was that prepared them. They knew what it meant to be an American when they were over there. So that, to me, is a model of leadership. And I think that's as possible today as it's ever been.
So you think it's possible? Like I was going to ask this, again, it may be a very shallow view, but it feels like this country is more divided than it has been in recent history. Perhaps the social media and all those kinds of things are merely revealing the division as opposed to creating the division. But is it possible to have a leader that unites in the same way that FDR did without, well, we're living through a pandemic. This is already so like I was going to say without suffering, but this is economic suffering. A huge number of people have lost their job. So is it possible to have is there one, a hunger? Is there a possibility to have an FDR style leader who unites?
Yes, I think that is what President Biden is trying. I'm not saying he'll succeed, but I think that's what he's trying to do. The way you do this is you do not allow yourself to be captured by your opponents in Congress or somewhere else. FDR had a lot of opponents in Congress. He had a lot of opponents in politics, governors and others who didn't like him. Herbert Hoover was still around and still accusing FDR of being, a conspiratist and all these other things. So, you don't allow yourself to be captured by the leaders of the other side. You go over their heads to the people. And so today, the way to do this is to explain to people and empathize with the suffering and dislocation and difficulties they're dealing with and show that you're trying to help them. Not an easy solution, not a simple statement, but here are some things we can all do together. That's why I think infrastructure makes a lot of sense. It's what FDR invested in too, right? FDR built Hoover Dam. Hoover Dam turned the lights on for young Lyndon Johnson, who grew up outside of Austin, right? FDR was the one who invested in road construction that was then continued by Dwight Eisenhower, by a Republican, with the interstate highway system, right? FDR invested through the WPA in building thousands of schools in our country, planting trees. That's the kind of work that can bring people together. You don't have to be a Democrat or Republican to say, you know what? We'd be a lot better off in my community if we had better infrastructure today. I want to be a part of that. Oh, well, maybe I can get a job doing that. Maybe my company can benefit from that. You bring people together, and that way it becomes a common mission, even if we have different ideological positions.
Yeah, it's funny. I've when I first heard Joe Biden, many years ago, I think he ran for president against Obama.
That's correct.
Right before I heard him speak, I really liked him. But once I heard him speak, I started liking him less and less. And it speaks to something interesting where it's hard to put into words why you connect with people. The empathy that you mentioned in FDR, you have like these bad, pardon the French, motherfuckers like Teddy Roosevelt that connect with you. There's something just powerful. And with Joe Biden, I want to really like him. And there's something not quite there where it feels like he doesn't quite know my pain.
Yep.
Even though he, on paper, is exactly, he knows the pain of the people, and there's something not connecting. And it's hard to explain. It's hard to put into words. And it makes me not, as an engineer and scientist, it makes me not feel good about like presidencies, because it makes me feel like it's more art than science.
It is an art. And I think it's exactly an art for the reasons you laid out. It's aesthetic. It's about feeling. It's about emotion. All the things that we can't engineer. We've tried for centuries to engineer emotion. We're never going to do it. Don't try it. I'm a parent of teenagers. Don't even try to explain emotion. But you hit on the key point and the key challenge for Biden. He's got to find the right words.
Yeah.
It's not finding the words to bullshit people.
Yeah.
It's finding the words to help express. We've all felt empowered and felt good when someone uses words that put into words what we're feeling.
Yeah.
That's what he needs. That's the job of a leader.
And there's certain words, I haven't heard many politicians use those words, but there's certain words that like make you forget that you're for immigration or against immigration, make you forget whether you're for wars and against wars, make you forget about like the bickering, and somehow like inspire you, like elevate you to believe in the greatness that this country could be.
Yes.
In that same way, like the reason I moved to Austin, it's funny to say, is like I just heard words from people, from friends, where they're excited by the possibility of the future here. I wasn't thinking like, what's the right thing to do? What's the like strategic? Because I want to launch a business. There's a lot of arguments with San Francisco or maybe staying in Boston in my case, but there's this excitement that was beyond reason. That was emotional.
Yes.
And that's what it seems like. That's what builds. That's what great leaders do, but that's what builds countries. That's what builds great businesses.
That's right. And it's what people say about Austin, for example, all the time.
Yeah.
Talented people who come here like yourself. And here's the interesting thing. No one person creates that. The words emerge.
Yeah.
And part of what FDR understood is you've got to find the words out there and use them.
Yeah.
You don't have to be the creator of them, right? Just as the great painter doesn't invent the painting, they're taking things from others.